They say invisibility is the price women pay for growing older. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes disappearing is just the beginning of the story. There's a certain kind of silence that comes before everything changes. Not loud, not sudden, just quiet. A quiet you barely notice until you realize it has swallowed you whole. That silence lived in my son's home long before I saw it. And when I finally did, I understood something no one ever warns you about. You can't keep giving parts of yourself away and expect to stay whole. My name is Ellen Blake. I was 68 years old when I moved in with my son and his wife Daniel and Jessica. Retired, widowed, helpful. That's how they described me. That's also how I thought of myself, at least. For a while. After more than 3 decades as an executive secretary at a high-powered law firm in Atlanta, I knew how to take care of people. I remembered birthdays, organized chaos, and solved problems before anyone knew they existed. I was the quiet backbone behind important men. I never asked for thanks. I was proud of that. When I retired, I didn't expect much. A slower pace, a gentler life. Maybe Sunday brunch with my grandchildren, a bit of gardening. Nothing grand, nothing noisy. So when Daniel and Jessica said, "Come live with us, we have the space," I said yes without a second thought. I packed my bags, cashed out some savings, to help them make the down payment on a bigger house. It wasn't just money, it was a gesture, a symbol of trust, of love. I didn't ask for my name on the deed. Why would I? Family is about love, not contracts. Or so I believed. In the beginning. Everything looked like the picture of harmony. Jessica called me a lifesaver. Daniel gave me his tired but grateful hugs. The children clung to me like ivy on a fence. I made dinners. I folded towels in the way no one ever taught MIT, just made sense. I filled the refrigerator with the kind of calm only a mother knows how to ripple through a kitchen. I was useful. I was wanted until I wasn't. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about erasure, it's polite. It wears a smile. It reorganizes your labels and calls it minimalism. It moves your chair to the end of the table and says it's for convenience. And all the while, you're telling yourself it's nothing. Till one day you realize your nothing has become everything. The pantry I stocked was reorganized over a weekend. The handwritten labels replaced with transparent jars that had no soul, just a sterile aesthetic. The casseroles I made became too heavy. The towels I folded were refolded. The lunches I used to pack, already done when I woke up. It's just easier this way. Jessica would say, and I knew that phrase, it was the phrase quiet women used, to dismiss other quiet women. The phrase I myself had used in conference rooms full of coffee and condescension. It was how we told each other, go back to shrinking. We have no space for your sound, so I started to shrink. I took my tea in my room. Instead of waiting for the dishwasher to hum, I cleaned when they weren't home. I stopped speaking at dinners unless I was spoken to. I told myself I was being respectful, till respect began to taste too much like absence. Somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing me as a person and started treating me like a function. Something changed inside of me the day Jessica threw a neighborhood brunch, and I spent 3 hours helping. Cleaned, wiped, cut fruit, arranged the napkins. When the guests arrived, she smiled brightly and took every ounce of credit. Didn't even gesture toward me, not even a nod. She didn't do it to be cruel. She didn't need to. I wasn't in the story anymore. I went back to my room that night, lay awake beneath the still ceiling, and realized something melancholy and clean. I had been helpful. I'd been present. And still, I'd disappeared. So I started saving things, receipts, emails, lines of quiet proof buried in folders and Ziplocs. The kind a younger version of me would have archived in beige cabinets with metal handles. I'd spent 30 years learning the power of documentation. And suddenly I was using it to take inventory of my own life. There's a point in every woman's life when she realizes no one is coming to preserve her dignity but herself. And so I called. John, Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but because I had learned to recognize the wind shifting. And when it does, a woman like me doesn't panic. She prepares. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner party before I unfold the weight of that evening, I want to say this. This is not a story of bitterness. This is not some scorned tale of revenge. This is about visibility, about finding your way back to your voice when the world has quietly asked you to be silent one too many times. And if you watching this have ever felt the slow, suffocating drip of being sidelined in your own life, then stay with me, because I promise you there is a moment coming. A moment when silence becomes strength. Don't go anywhere, and if you're feeling this story already, even just a little, subscribe, share, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know where this voice is finally being heard. This is my story, but maybe it's yours too. It started with the pantry. A few weeks after moving in, I came downstairs one morning to find every shelf completely redone. My labeled containers had vanished, replaced by mason jars and white baskets. No chocolate chip cookies for the kids. No powdered ginger for winter teas. Just rows of clean eating and carefully staged perfection. Jessica saw me standing there and said cheerfully, "I'm just streamlining. Hope that's okay." Streamlining? I nodded. Of course. What else? Could I say it was her house, right? Only it wasn't just the pantry. It was the laundry, too. Then the lunches. Then the way the television volume was lowered when I entered the room, as if my presence disrupted the flow of their preferred silence. Then the way I wasn't asked questions at dinner anymore, about my day or the book I was reading, or even what we might cook on Sunday. I had stepped easily into their lives, and now they were quietly stepping around me. To Jessica, I became a ghost with helpful hands. To Daniela's son, I nursed through fevers, taught to drive. Watched marry a woman I once believed was magic high, became something distant. A noise he chose to ignore. At first, it was easy to pretend I was imagining things. I had known stress, I had known grief. Maybe this was just a transition. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But women like me, we feel shifts in tone long before they thunder. We hear silence louder than words. Things change slowly. Deftly, Jessica would redo the children's lunches after I packed them. She'd restack dishes I had put away already. She'd make light comments in front of guests, like it's like having an extra pair of hands around. But with opinions, and the smile. It's that polite, glazed-over smile. The kind people offer when you've outlived your usefulness in the room. One evening, while folding laundry, her laundry eye held up a pair of neatly folded jeans only for Jessica to snatch them from my hands with a too bright. "Oh, don't worry, I've got it." As if I were interfering. That word struck me like ice. I returned quietly to my room. It's the only space that still seemed to welcome me. There, I sat in the yellow light of the bedside lamp, opening my journal not for reflection, but to count, to remember, to track what I was no longer allowed to do. I've always been a woman of systems. Filing, organizing, identifying patterns. And now, the pattern was unmistakable. They were slowly pushing me out without ever opening a door. Still, I said nothing. Not. Even when I overheard Jessica say on a phone call she didn't even try to keep private. Yeah. Daniel's mom helped with the down payment, but it's technically a gift, so no, she's not on the paperwork. That word again, gift. Funny how something so warm in theory can be used to strip you of all value. I liquidated savings bonds accounts I'd kept hidden away for decades, not because they asked, but because I loved, not because I wanted. Leverage, but legacy, a future. A feeling of home, of togetherness. Of mattering. Instead. It became my silence made legal. The air in the house changed after that. I no longer moved around freely. I waited for people to leave before entering the kitchen. I took notes, days, comments, transferred amounts. I opened the old folder I had tucked at the bottom of my suitcase from months ago and added to it wire transfers, email exchanges. Handwritten. Notes from Daniel, we couldn't do this without you. Receipts with highlight marks. Proof. There was nothing dramatic in it. Not yet. But I knew enough to gather my evidence before a storm. And then the children started asking why I no longer helped pack their lunches, why I wasn't at the dinner table, why my tea smelled like cinnamon and lavender, the tea I only brewed when trying to soothe nerves. It broke my heart a little. Every time I smiled at them and said, "Oh, Grandma's just a bit tired." I wasn't tired. One day, Daniel walked past my room and smiled gently the way someone tests a cracked window to see if it can still be opened. "You okay, Mom?" "Of course," I said, but I wanted to ask him, "Where did you go? If you aren't cruel, if you aren't blind, but you stopped choosing me. Was it easier to side with comfort than to see your mother as a person?" Later that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by memory. John Whitmore, an old colleague. Once a junior partner under my wing. Now a lawyer with quiet muscles of wisdom in his voice. "Ellen Blake," he said, answering. On the second ring, there was a smile buried in the way he said my name. "John," I answered, trying to sound breezy. "I haven't called to complain. Didn't think you had," he replied. "Just figured it was time." It was. We met for lunch the following week. Two old soldiers of a quieter war, sitting across from each other in a corner booth. I slid the folder across the table. He brought out his pen after I laid out the facts, carefully labeled. John looked up and said something I'll never forget. "You gave them a gift." "Yes. But that doesn't mean they can pretend you gave up your worth." He offered legal options. Careful ones. Neutral language. No emotional fireworks. Protection, not protest. I didn't say yes yet. I didn't need vengeance. I just needed power. I walked out of that cafe lighter than I had felt in months. I wasn't angry, was awake, and I knew one way or another the moment was coming. The moment a woman like me would either vanish forever or finally let the world know I see myself, and I will not be erased. Sometimes all it takes is one invitation to change the course of everything. It came on a Monday morning. A small, white envelope was waiting on my dresser when I returned from my morning walk. No handwriting, just gold-embossed letters that read, "You're invited." Inside, the message was brief. Too brief. "Join us for dinner. 7 years, 7 toasts. Saturday at 7 p.m., dress nicely, no warmth, no welcome, just expectation." I had always been expected to be helpful, to be silent, to be gentle. But this time I read the card differently. This wasn't a request, it was a cue for me to stay in my place, to show up, smile, and blend into the background just like always. Only this time wouldn't, because this time I had a folder in my purse and a lawyer who had known my worth since 1986. I called John that afternoon. "I think it's time," I told him, my voice low but certain. He didn't ask what for. He'd never been one for assumptions. "Would you like me to come?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but not as my lawyer." He paused. "As my witness. I'll bring a blazer," he said, with a kindness that traveled through the phone. Like heat the rest of the week, I moved through the house like a shadow made of steel. Jessica didn't notice. Daniel didn't ask. The kids were too busy chasing summer, and I was busy preparing. Saturday came with sunlight. Just warm enough to make you forget there could be storms. I chose a navy blue dress I had kept sealed in dry cleaner plastic since Daniel's college graduation. Long sleeves, soft silk lining. I pinned my mother's silver brooch to the side. Brushed my hair back, slow and neat. When I looked in the mirror, something flickered. It wasn't just that I looked nice. It was that I looked back, fully present, fully seen if only by myself. Before slipping out of the room, I reached for the folder inside my purse. The worn leather flap laying over pages of carefully preserved evidence. I didn't intend to use them, not unless I had to. But, I needed them near me after all. Some women carry handbags. Others carry history. Downstairs. Jessica was in hostess mode, light pink lipstick, crisp lines, a sparkle in her laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. She barely glanced up as I passed. "Oh, good, you're dressed," she said. "Can you answer the door in a bit while I prep the dessert trays?" "No, thank you." "No, you look beautiful." Just delegation wrapped in sugar. But I didn't argue. I simply walked to the living room. A moment later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find John Whitmore. He looked striking, gray blazer, soft white shirt open at the collar, a patience in his smile. "Hello, Ellen," he said gently. "Evening, John," I answered. Stepping aside when Jessica came to greet him, she extended a perfectly polite hand and asked, "And how do you two know each other again?" "We worked together in law many years ago," I said simply. She nodded, uninterested. The details of my life had never seemed to matter unless they fed hers. Dinner was served precisely at 7. 12 guests, 3 dishes, polished laughter. Matching wine glasses. Jessica flourished with every plate served, every toast lifted. Daniel stayed close to her side, following her rhythm without missing a beat. I was seated at the far end of the table, by design, next to a woman who'd been talking for 10 minutes about her kitchen renovations, backsplashes, stone counters, voice-activated lighting. I smiled, nodded, sipped my water. It was strange how invisible one can feel in a well-lit room. Then dessert came, followed by digestives and the ceremonial glass tap. Jessica stood, eyes shimmering beneath a dim chandelier. She began her well-rehearsed speech, full of gratitude and glossy phrases. She raised a glass to love, to growth, to the journey of marriage. Everyone listened politely. Then, as if cued by memory, she turned her attention to me. "And of course," she said with a too-sweet smile, "we're grateful for Ellen, Daniel's mother. It's always so supportive in the background. Such a rare kind of presence these days. Knowing when to help and when to be quiet, that's a gift in itself." And there it was, the insult buried in politeness, the reminder to everyone in that room of where I supposedly belonged at the edge. Just close enough to serve, never close enough to matter. Something in me rippled. I didn't flinch. I reached slowly into my purse, pulled out the leather folder, placed it gently in front of me on the crisp white tablecloth. Just that small gesture was enough, because the moment Jessica saw it, she faltered. Her smile twitched. Daniel glanced up, confused, unsettled. John tilted his head slightly, watching every movement like a hawk in the corner. But I said nothing. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I was holding the truth and letting them feel the weight. Jessica tried to cover. She lifted her glass awkwardly and forced another chuckle. "Ellen, always so prepared," she said lightly. Around the table, silence stretched. That humming tension when people realize they've misunderstood. It's a quiet woman. I stood calmly, offered a soft smile to the room. "Sometimes," I said, "being quiet isn't a sign of weakness. It's a choice, a strength. One we've learned to wield when no one else is listening." No one moved. I didn't stay standing out of spite. I stayed because I had spent too many years sitting down when I should have claimed my space. Then I leaned slightly toward John and asked, "Would you mind walking me to the kitchen? I need a moment of fresh air." He rose without hesitation, offered me his arm, and nodded. And when I stepped away from that table with nothing but my dignity and a witness by my side, I didn't feel small. I felt returned. The kitchen smelled faintly of ginger and melted candle wax, sweet, with an edge of something burned beneath. The kind of mix that can only belong to a house trying to look like a home in front of strangers. John stood beside me near the sink, while I watched the soft clinking of forks and glasses fade from the dining room behind us. "I don't need air," I admitted. "Not really." "I know," he replied. "You needed space." He was right. For what felt like years, I had made myself small enough to fit inside everyone else's expectations. Always adjusting, always compensating. But no one ever shrank for me. and I was done folding. After a moment, we returned to the table. Jessica was pouring coffee, her smile tighter now, every movement a little too rehearsed. She was steering herself back into control, but the water had already shifted. The room, once warm with superficial ease, had turned cautious. No one asked what was in the folder. No one dared. I sat back down, laid my fingertips on the edge of the leather dot, and then I spoke clear. .com, deliberate. Jessica, thank you again for the dinner. The food was lovely, truly. She nodded too quickly, but I continued. I did bring something tonight. I lifted one paper, single page, the bank transfer. My signature, the header of the account. Quiet but undeniable. I've been meaning to discuss things privately, I said, letting each word settle. But since we're all here and this is a celebration of transparency and partnership, perhaps now is as good a time as any. Jessica froze. Her hand stopped mid-motion over the sugar bowl. Daniel, across from her, sat up straighter, confused, worried, probably wishing he didn't recognize the font on the form I held. John rested his hands gently on the table. I am John Whitmore, he said evenly, and I've been retained by Ellen to provide legal counsel and estate protection. We're currently reviewing all financial contributions related to the purchase of this property. Including, he gestured lightly toward the document, a substantial sum that was classified informally as a gift, without documentation to support that framing. His voice was calm, practiced, a man stating facts, not accusations. And yet, in that room, its presence cut sharper than any outburst ever could. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. This isn't necessary, she finally stammered. We're family. We can sort this among ourselves. We are family, I echoed gently, which is why this should never have gotten to the point where I needed protection. Daniel looked stunned, like he was watching someone he didn't recognize his mother, measured and resolute. I didn't know, he said softly. I didn't think it meant a great deal, I said, meeting his eyes fully. Not just the money, the intent behind it. The place I thought I held in this family. Jessica stood abruptly. I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome. This is humiliating. Humiliation, I said, is being thanked in front of guests for being invisible. And with that, I rose. There was no shouting, no demands, just facts. Quiet power. A pause in the rhythm they had never noticed. I helped compose. We can finish this discussion privately, John offered. But the documents speak for themselves. I looked around the room one final time, guests now wide-eyed and awkwardly polite. And I realized something strange. I didn't care what they thought. This wasn't for them. This was for me to see. My own reflection clearly again, to stop waiting for permission to matter. As we stepped away from the table, Jessica followed us into the hallway. You ruined the night, she whispered sharply. You couldn't just leave it alone. I turned to her, not angry, but awake. No, I said calmly. I didn't ruin the night. I just refused to keep pretending. Her face flushed. Her hands trembled at her sides. She wasn't used to me like this. Solid, undeniable. John stayed quiet, standing tall behind me like a reminder that I wasn't alone, Evan, when I had been. Back in my room, I placed the file gently on the bed. Within a week, I'd mailed the formal request for accounting. John would draw it up with precision. I'd review it twice. I already knew there wouldn't be a direct response from Jessica. People who operate in silence don't know how to handle confrontation delivered with elegance. But the message had already landed. I wouldn't be pushed anymore. I wouldn't be erased. Later that night, I brewed tea slowly, letting the water boil until it whistled. I didn't drink it. I just held the cup in my hands and stood alone at the window. Daniel knocked on the door. He stepped into the room. Eyes lowered. You've been unhappy? He said. For a while now. I didn't want to be, I replied. I told myself I wasn't. I kept finding smaller places to fit into, thinking it was my duty. But I gave more than I should have, especially while you looked away. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. I thought, you liked helping. I smiled, though it came with a sad edge. Helping is wonderful, until it's all you become. There was nothing easy about that moment. No hugs, no dramatic apologies, just truth. And Daniel didn't fight it. "Do you want to stay?" he asked, after a long pause. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I need to be somewhere that sees me." He nodded slowly, sadness blooming in his eyes for what he hadn't known, and what he couldn't undo. The following morning, I started packing. Not in a flurry of rage, just quiet resolve. My bookshelf, first photo by photo, memory by memory. There was a time I thought love meant staying. Now I was learning that sometimes love means leaving. The day I left wasn't stormy or dramatic. It was quiet, bright. A Wednesday, the children were at school. Jessica had taken her Pilates class, and Daniel, perhaps on purpose, had scheduled late meetings at work. No one interfered. No one tried to stop me, and maybe that silence was the loudest goodbye of all. I had already done the calling, signed a lease, paid the deposit. A small apartment on the third floor of an older brick building. No elevator, no concierge. Just two large windows, facing east, and a faint floral scent in the hallway, part dust, part lavender. Packing didn't take long. My life, it turned out, fit comfortably into 6 medium boxes, 2 suitcases, and a folder of documents that meant more now than ever before. But it was the photo albums that made me pause. Not because I doubted leaving, but because they held versions of me I didn't want to forget. Ellen the mother. Ellen the wife. Ellen, the woman with the phone always ringing and lists forever scribbled on napkins. She deserved to come too, but she wouldn't take up as much space anymore. I loaded the car. John met me at the curb. He didn't ask if I needed help. He just lifted boxes with the natural loyalty of someone who'd once admired your strength in silence, and was now witnessing your return to it. The drive took 23 minutes. We didn't speak much. There wasn't much to say. Beginnings don't announce themselves. They arrive ... quietly. The apartment was warm and worn. The key stuck in the door just slightly. The floor creaked in 2 very specific places. The kitchen faucet needed replacing. And I loved it deeply by the end of the day. I unpacked slowly. First, the bookshelf. I hadn't realized how many books. I had collected memoirs, poetry, gardening, legal drama thrillers with titles like The Last Objection. I stacked them with care, even those I hadn't touched in years. Then came the tea, lavender, ginger, chamomile. No one rolled their eyes at my blends here. No passive aggressiveness disguised as helpful suggestions. No silent code of what was acceptable. I began to belong to myself again by Thursday. I wandered down the block and found a corner cafe with chipped cups and the best raspberry lemon scones I'd had in years. The barista was maybe 19, with scarlet hair and chipped black nail polish. She smiled at me without pity or precondition. That was enough to make me come back the next morning. On Friday, met Gail. She lived down the hall, 72, retired. Drama teacher, bold hair curlers, purple slippers. Called me Miss Ellen immediately and asked if I played bridge. I used to, I said, but I was never very good. That's not a requirement, she smiled. We mostly play for gossip and cookies. We agreed to meet Sunday for tea. By Saturday, I had reopened an old file folder on my desk, labeled simply Stories. It had sat ignored for too long, like I had. Inside were pages yellowed with age, some typed, some handwritten in long-forgotten spidery loops. Pieces of sentences, half-told tales. I poured tea, sat on a new chair that still smelled of warehouse, plastic, and began to write again. Not because I wanted publishing deals or likes or comments, but because I remembered something. I had things to say. And whether or not anyone else heard them lick mattered again. The air in my apartment was light, honest, my rules, my rhythm, my voice echoing in the space not as filler but as presence. One night around 10 p.m., got a call from Daniel. "I just wanted to know you were okay." "I am," I said. "I'm more than okay." There was a pause. "I miss having you around." "The kids, I miss them too," I replied gently. "That part hurts." Another pause. Softer now. "I didn't see it, Mom. Everything you went through." "I'm sorry I didn't ask you to protect me," I said. "Only to see me." And it was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. He didn't defend Jessica. He didn't try to rewrite my experience. He listened. And that was enough to begin something new. The following week, Jessica emailed me. A single line. "If you're ready to talk, I'd like to apologize." And listen, I didn't respond immediately, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I was learning to protect my energy. Some peace costs far too much to hand over quickly. And here, in my small, imperfect apartment with its leaky faucet and its thousand possibilities, I had built peace by hand, relearning joy. One step at a time. I took walks at sunset, started baking again without judgment about portion control, read poetry aloud while watering a small succulent named Nancy Drew. I wrote stories I never dared share before, ones about middle-aged women with sharp minds and tired hearts who refused to disappear quietly. I laughed more. Not loudly, but deeply, like I had remembered the joke life was always trying to tell me. You are not finished. You are evolving. There is no age where becoming ends. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting on anyone to validate my role. I was authoring it, and every word tasted like freedom. One afternoon in late September, I sat near the window as golden light spilled across the mosaic tile floor of my apartment. Outside, the city breathed slowly, steady, warm, alive in its own quiet. Nancy Drew, my resilient little succulent, leaned toward the sun like she was reaching for something just out of grasp. And maybe we all were. I had grown into this space. Not just the apartment, but this version of my life. Stronger, simpler, authentically mine. There were still days when I missed the children's giggles echoing through the hallway, or the warmth of being called Mom in passing. But longing had become memory, and memory had become part of my landscape, not a wound, but a thread in the fabric, and that was enough. Gail still came every Sunday at 4. We shared pound cake and passed her iPad back and forth, showing each other articles, old photos, and the occasional bingo meme. We didn't need to prove anything anymore. There's a comfort that comes with age. You grow less interested in spectacle, more devoted to substance. One Sunday, she turned to me and said, "You're writing again, aren't you?" I nodded. "I hear it in your voice," she added. "People with stories in their bones always speak softer when they start to unfold." She was right. Most mornings I wrote for 2 hours. Fiction, essays, moments. Sometimes stories I wished someone had written for me 30 years ago. Sometimes I cried while typing. And not always from sadness, often from relief. Because I was speaking again. A few weeks later, an email arrived from a small online literary journal. They wanted to publish one of my personal essays. It wasn't a fancy magazine, no paycheck, no promise of fame, but it was something better. It was proof that my voice hadn't vanished, that it had only gone quiet for a while, till I was ready to listen again. Daniel brought the kids over for lunch the next Saturday. He texted first, asked respectfully, gave me space to say no. I said yes. Jessica didn't come, and that was okay. Growth doesn't mean forced reunions. It means choosing peace even when comfort requires space. We kept the visit simple. Sandwiches, juice boxes, old board games the grandkids insisted I'd totally lose at, which of course I did on purpose when they left. Daniel lingered at the door. "Thank you," he said, "for letting us back in." I smiled. "Thank you," I answered, "for seeing me." As the door closed behind him, I didn't feel regret. I didn't ache. For the years swallowed in silence, I felt aligned, balanced, like I had finally moved from the edges. Back to the center of my own life. What I learned in these months was something I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't owe permanence to a place that treats you like a guest. You don't need to stay somewhere just because you helped build the walls. Women, especially women like my, raised on politeness and usefulness and making sure everyone else is okay before ourselves, we learn to disappear too well. But I no longer wanted to vanish in service of harmony. I wanted to live out loud in service of truth. Comfort had always been my offering now. Dignity was my demand, and with it came a sacred, joyful kind of freedom to choose my days, to decorate with intention, to learn the names of clouds. Again, to walk under trees just to marvel at how golden leaves sound when they fall, to rediscover the version of me that existed before roles and routines became the story everyone else read out loud on my behalf. The final draft was mine now, and I was writing it in pen. I leave you with this. Dear listener, you don't become invisible 'cause you age. You become invisible when you let others define your worth with silence. Undo it. Raise your voice not with noise, but with knowing. Knowing that your presence matters, that your wisdom is weight, not burden, that your love is generous, but it is not infinite if it is never returned. Be seen if they won't offer you a place. Build your own table, set it with lavender tea and raspberry scones. And welcome only those who understand that your kindness is not permission to be overlooked. You are not background. You are not backup. You are the center. And the story doesn't truly begin until you stop waiting to be invited into your own life. So if this story touched you, if you saw yourself, your mother, your aunt, your friend, if you ever felt helpful when you needed to be heard, then don't let it stop here. Share it with someone who needs reminding. Subscribe for more voices like Ellen's. Like it because you deserve to say, I see myself, and comment below. Me, your story. The world needs more women speaking from the center, like Ellen, like you.